I'm just going to start us off because we're already 2 minutes behind. I just want to say good afternoon to everyone and welcome to our webinar, Digital Archiving 101, the what, the why, and the how to get started. This is the first in a series of 4 webinars which will take place on a Tuesday lunchtime. My name is Audrey Wilson and I am the Partnership and Engagement Manager at the Scottish Council and Archives. And I'm going to be your chair today. So on behalf of everyone behind the scenes, I'd like to extend a warm welcome and a huge thank you to all of you for joining us. Just a bit of a brief background before we get started. The Scottish Council and Archives and Community Archive Heritage Group Scotland are working with Our Heritage, Our Stories, a project led by the University of Glasgow, and it's part of the Arts and Humanities Research Council programme towards a national collection, TANK. So today's webinar will explain what a digital archive is, why it's important, and how you can get started. The Digital Preservation Toolkit for community archives will be introduced and guidance on how to use it. You'll learn about a digital archive and you'll get 10 basic steps to focus on to start preserving your own content. We will hear from 2 speakers today. Our first is Karyn Williamson, who holds a master's degree in archives and record management, and she is currently a digital preservation analyst with the Digital Preservation Coalition and the author of the Digital Preservation Toolkit for community archives. Our second speaker is Ian Craig, who is a curator and he works for Community Land Scotland, an organisation that supports and promotes community ownership of land in Scotland. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. We have enabled closed captions. You can access this by going to the bottom of your screen, clicking on More, and then clicking on Captions. This webinar is being recorded. If you don't want to be seen, please turn your camera off. And just know that we won't be putting the Q&A, the questions into the recording. So sit back and relax and enjoy the presentations, and without worrying about taking any notes, we can provide you with the slides later. Okay, let's begin. Over to you, Karyn.
Thanks, Audrey. Hi everyone, lovely to be here speaking to you all today. So as Audrey says, my name is Karyn and I'm a Digital Preservation Analyst with the Digital Preservation Coalition, not otherwise known as the DPC. So I'm a qualified archivist and I've worked in a range of archives for the last 15 years. But the last 6 or so years of that time, I've focused on digital records. So I'm here today to talk about digital archiving, what it is and why it's important. And then I'll describe a possible route that will help you get started or review your current processes. So what is digital archiving? One of the most confusing things about getting started in this type of work is that there is no single agreed upon definition for the type of thing that we do. Digital archiving, digital preservation, digital stewardship, and digital curatorship are all used interchangeably, although they do tend to mean roughly the same thing to most people. Working for the DPC, we tend to use the term digital preservation. But what are we talking about when we use any of these terms? Digital preservation refers to the series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary. It refers to all of the actions required to maintain access to digital materials beyond the limits of media failure or technological and organisational change. So this is the definition from the DPC handbook, and it aims to give as broad a definition of the topic as possible, because there are so many moving parts involved that it is unlikely that 2 groups or organisations will have identical policies, processes and workflows. And this is a good thing, because it means that as long as the work that you are doing contributes in some way to the long-term preservation of your digital content, you are doing digital preservation. The definition of a digital archivist given by the UK National Archive is just as broad. Digital archivists select primary sources that document the activities of institutions, communities and individuals. They then preserve the records and make them available for others to use. Digital archivists work with records that are created digitally or material that has been changed into a digital format. Again, if this sounds like the work that you do within your community group, then you are doing digital preservation. But what are you doing? Digital preservation work can be split into 3 main sections that all the other tasks that we do fall under. Without some work in all of these areas, preservation of digital collections in any group or organisation will not be possible. So the first area is technology, which covers the technical aspects of digital preservation. This includes the storage we pick for our content, how we back it up, what, if any, systems we use throughout the process, any tools and programs we use to help, and security, ensuring that our content is protected against viruses or cyber attack. Technology is important, but it's not the full story. The second area is organisation, which includes policy, strategy, procedure, any risks involved, but also any benefits of the work that you do, and staffing, whether this be volunteers or paid staff. Organisation is an essential part of your digital preservation work as it sets out the path that you will take, and it makes sure that everyone working on your content is on the same page and carrying out the same processes. Every group will create their own policy and procedure to suit them, the content they have, and how they work, so there is no right answer. Resources is the final area. This area consists broadly of the management required to keep your group functioning. This includes business planning, funding, sustainability, financial planning, and staff skills development. Without this area, your group may not have the funds or the skills required to continue to work on your content in the long term. So now we know what digital archiving is. However, it's also important in this context to note what digital preservation is not, as this will definitely have an impact on how you work with your content. Digital preservation is not digitisation. Digitisation is a separate process which creates digital content and digital copies of your physical content. Digital preservation is the process that comes afterwards when you work to preserve this content to make sure that it will remain usable and accessible for the long term. Both processes are important, but they are separate and they should be planned for as such. Digitisation should not take place without a plan to preserve the content that you are creating. Digital preservation is also not storage. Storage is a task that should be worked on as part of the digital preservation process, but just storing your content and not doing anything else with it does not guarantee preservation of your content, and so does not constitute digital preservation. Ultimately, digital preservation is about making an investment in properly managing digital collections with common sense, consistency, and attention to detail. Careful planning for digital preservation will safeguard your assets and avoid the need for costly intervention further down the line. In addition, documenting what you do and why you are doing it will help anyone who needs to work on your collections in the future. So now we know what digital archiving is, but why do we do it? For community archives, the main reason to preserve your digital content is to ensure that the stories, images, and content that you have remain accessible for as long as possible. The content that you are collecting is unique and important, and adds a different dimension to the official records collected by national and local authority collections. Documenting cultural heritage is one of the most important roles an archive has. In addition to this, making your content available for genealogy and academic research purposes is also important. And in some cases, you may have the option to monetize your records to ensure the sustainability of your group. Preservation and digital archiving will ensure your content stays accessible long after we are no longer the custodians of your content. So we know the what and the why, but how do we get started? Last week, on World Digital Preservation Day, the Digital Preservation Toolkit for Community Archives was launched. This toolkit has been designed specifically for those just starting out on their digital preservation journey. It includes a range of resources and support to help you get started. And I'm going to talk about one element of the toolkit today. The toolkit has been split into 10 topics, and each topic has 3 levels. Level 1 has been pulled together into a document entitled Just One Thing. This document is your one-stop shop if you are just starting out on your journey and you have very little time, budget, and resources. Each topic contains just one easy and free to implement piece of advice. If all 10 are carried out, the result will be a basic but functioning digital preservation workflow that you can choose to leave as it is or build on using the other levels of the toolkit. The resource also includes a resource pack of templates for you to work with. So, the first topic is Create and Choose Your Content, which focuses on how you decide what content belongs in your collections, how you decide before your content is donated, and how you select content to keep from what is already held by your group. Next, Organise Your Content provides guidance on how to name your files, how to structure them in online folders, and your options if you would rather use a system to manage this aspect of the process. Who Does What does exactly what it says on the tin. It gives information on how to document who does what task and why it's so important to write this down. Understand Your Content focuses on the content that you hold within your collections, what you have, where it is stored, and how you collect the information about your content that is of the most importance to your group. Keep Your Content is about all things storage, where you keep your content, how you decide what storage medium is right for you, and how you review your current storage setup. Control Your Content is next, and aimed at those using an external provider to store, preserve, or provide access to their content. It includes a reminder to make sure you always have easy access to your own collections and that you can leave a provider if you need to. Next is Make Copies. Again, this topic is self-explanatory. This topic explains why having more than one copy of your content is so important and why every group should be making copies of their collections. Plan to Share is next, and this focuses on the areas that you need to be aware of when planning to provide access to your collections. Information rights, copyright, and general data protection regulations are all covered and practical guidance is provided. Then we have Preserve Your Website. Our work with community groups shows that a lot of community groups store and provide access to their collections online using a website. This level explains how easy it is to have your website preserved for you. And finally, we have Safeguard Your Content. So this topic is about planning for the worst, but expecting the best. No one wants to think about their group closing down, but it is so important to have a plan in place for if the worst should happen, and this topic helps with that. So the toolkit isn't intended to cover every possible digital preservation task, but to introduce the type of work involved and get you started. And this is also why the toolkit doesn't focus on the more technical aspects of digital preservation work. The bulk of good digital preservation centres on good information management. Good foundations will give you a strong base to build on as your group grows and develops. So hopefully this whistle-stop introduction to the Just One Thing resource has been useful. We're always interested in your feedback and your thoughts once you've had a chance to use the resources. The toolkit will be regularly added to and updated, so if you think something is missing or needs more explanation, let us know. You can get in touch using the email address on screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions or hear any comments that you might have. So I'm also just going to reshare. My screen has frozen. Is helpful. There we go. Now we can see everyone's faces. So I just wanted to show you the full toolkit just before I pass on to any questions, and then we can move on to Craig. So the link that was in the presentation will take you to this page here, which is the full toolkit. And the resource that we are talking about today is the Just One Thing resource, which is here. So you can click there, and it takes you to the web page, but you can also download the toolkit as a PDF version, which looks like this. And at the end, you can also print this one off. And at the end, it has a range of templates for you to print off and fill in, which will also give you a record of all the work that you're doing. And I will stop there just to keep us to time.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. We have a lot of people on board now. Our second speaker, I am not seeing Ian Craig, and I don't know if Ian has signed in as someone else, or if he could let us know if he is around. That would be great. I have spoken to our second speaker, Ian, earlier today, so I am expecting him to be here. But perhaps in the meantime, we can just carry on with any questions that we might have for Karyn. Now, I am very happy to ask questions if you put them into the chat. I will just have a look to see if anyone has done that. But also, if you'd like to ask Karyn directly a question, we can unmute you and you can actually ask Karyn yourself. To do this, I'm going to ask you just to go to the bottom of your screen to react, and you can put your hand up. And then I can quite clearly see you if anyone wants to do that. So please do. One of the things perhaps I'm going to say I wanted to ask you, Karyn, was how did you go about making the Digital Preservation Toolkit for this specific audience of community archives? I mean, did you work with community groups, or how did you do this?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself there for some reason. Yeah, so I wanted to include that in today's talk, but I didn't have enough time, unfortunately. So the main thing that we wanted was for the toolkit to be relevant and useful. So we worked with a wide range of community archives across the UK and Ireland to do that. We took a lot of the research that had already been done by the Our Heritage, Our Stories project, and then we also ran a range of focus groups and surveys which are targeted specifically at community archives. I'm fairly sure there's a few people on the call who actually helped us do that. And that sort of helped us work out what we probably shouldn't have in the toolkit. So for example, people were very against the idea of jargon and acronyms and complicated language, and they wanted something really simple, really basic, that sort of filled in that gap between the resources that are published and used for professional qualified archivists, and gave sort of an in-between thing for people to start with that they could then build up to that. So it was a huge collaboration. We took a lot of time. We had a lot of versions of the toolkit matrix, to end up at 10 topics. We started with around 25, and it was just so overwhelming that even I was a bit worried by it. I was not impressed. So we cut it right down, and that's how we landed with the 10 topics and then the 3 levels to try and split it up even further.
Great. No, I mean, I could see it's a huge amount of work, so that's great. And also, I think the Digital Preservation Coalition are going to be keeping that up to date and making it available basically forever, aren't they? So it's going to be relevant.
Yeah, so although the Our Heritage, Our Stories project ends in January next year, the toolkit will be sustained by the DPC going forward. Again, in full collaboration with the community archive sector. We really are keen to hear what works, what doesn't, what's good, what's bad. anything that you would expect him to see in there topic-wise that maybe we haven't covered. So for example, at the launch event last week, somebody had pointed out that they would like content and information about funding, as we all would. So that's something that we're going to look into as time goes on. Hopefully we'll continue to add quite regularly to the toolkit.
Great. Thank you. Now, quite a few questions have come into the chat room, but I'm going to hold you. You can ask them later on, because Ian's joined us. I can see him. So Ian, lovely to see you. I'm very keen to hear about the digital archive at Community Land Scotland. So without delaying it any further, can you share your screen?
Okay, good.
Thank you. Brilliant.
No worries. Well, yeah, again, apologies for being late. My name's Ian Craig. I am working with Community Land Scotland, who are a small organisation, charity who advocate on behalf of community landowners in Scotland. The work of the organisation is really to be a communal voice for community ownership. There are many voices for the other ownerships in Scotland that advocate very clearly on their behalf. So it's felt like there was this requirement to have a place for community owners to come together and for their voices to be resonating around in terms of those debates happening. So I'm a curator on a project called 100 Years of Community Ownership. It's a centenary since the first ever community land buyout, although that's slightly a fib. It was actually 1923, and it wasn't really a buyout, it was more a sort of benevolent gift of land in Lewis to a community in Stornoway. But we felt like it was a nice opportunity to really reflect on what happened then and what has happened since, which has been quite a lot. So Líne Ngerin, which is the century of land, basically, so 100 years of community ownership, is an 18-month-long project looking to build a national archive of community ownership for the centenary. So it was felt that the communities who have been getting on with buying their own land or taking ownership of the land that they reside on were often so busy that they didn't really value taking the time to document their own history or to celebrate it or to talk about it. So with that in mind, we felt like this was a good chance for us to maybe come together around the centenary and ask people to reflect and try and capture those stories that they have. And it's often described as a revolution that happened in crofting kitchens across the land, very quietly and just over tables and cups of tea and frustration. But actually, all the more important to try and find a way to bring those stories and safeguard them and ensure that they're there for the future. And to be honest, to ensure that they're there for the here and now as well. So the project overall, now I've only got 10 minutes. Have I still got 10 minutes, or have I eaten into my own time by being late, Leslie?
No, just keep going. Just keep
Oh,
going.
all right, glad. Just in case, you keep me right. But the project overall includes a series of lectures and talks named after Simon Fraser, who was an instrumental lawyer who sadly passed away a number of years ago. But those are looking to sort of bring up topics and themes and unpick them and, you know, instigate discourse around those. There's been a touring exhibition of artwork, which have all come out of work with community-owned groups and artists working together, as well as an oral history training program, as well as the archive build itself. So there's lots of different facets to the project overall. So I'm not quite sure how I'm going to achieve all of it in 18 months, but we'll see how it goes. So very briefly, yeah, the reason it felt like it mattered was that community ownership is one of the most important political and economic social movements in Scotland in the last century. So it felt like we needed to bring some of these stories to make sure that they're documented properly. We were very keen as well to find a model which would allow communities to tell the story themselves in their own words, and for it not to feel like an extractive process or for us to curate something, but this was for the communities to tell their own story and for us to collate it together in one place so that it's easy to access for people, but that we weren't controlling the tone of it or the nature of it in any way. And yeah, it's basically the reasons that we're wanting to do this are twofold. One is to help those communities really reflect on the journey they've been on, to take a moment and a breath, to come back together, to kind of gather around what they've achieved. So to do something for themselves in one way. Also then to use those stories to try and bring new voices and understanding, and people who just don't have a sense of what community ownership is all about, to take those stories to them and find ways of developing engagement and opportunities there to bring new people into the conversation, to probably on a low level inspire people to think about doing the same sort of thing in their own community. So it's really about, you know, wanting to build understanding about what it is. I've thrown in a few images, so it's not just all bright yellow and hurting your eyes. So we'll give you bits of visual relief. This was a photo from the launch of the exhibition, which was called Where We Stand, which is going to be remounted actually. So should you be in Scotland, and well, it's going to cover most of Scotland actually. It's not travelling this time. This one was with the Travelling Gallery, who are based in Edinburgh. So we kitted the bus out with 6 pieces of artwork and a story about community ownership and the journey of Scotland's land ownership and the oddness of it, which travelled around to many venues around the country and is seen by 2,500 people. But it's there was a number of places we didn't get to, and we got quite a lot of stern feedback via the internet. So we found the money to remount it, and it's going to go back out, and we'll get to almost all of Scotland, I think, if everything goes well, from mid-January. So if you're interested, keep a wee eye out. Why digital was the right thing? I think the reality is that community groups are so occupied, especially in this moment in time, with so much pressure and uncertainty in terms of the funding landscape and challenges around keeping staff that they have or finding money to get staff and to build a sort of sustainable models. Asking for anything more than the lightest touch commitment felt like it would be unachievable. So digital definitely felt like the right route to go down, because we could make it as slight a intervention as possible, but also leave the scope for it to be something much more kind of intense if the capacity was there and the will was there. Because there's, you know, some communities have historical societies next door, or, you know, people on the board of one will be connected to the other, and there's lots of enthusiasm kicking about, but others could just be 2 people who are run ragged and struggling to survive with what they've got. So we had to be mindful of that. So the project is funded through the Heritage Lottery Fund with some support from Creative Scotland and also some funding from the Scottish Government. It's 18 months in total that we have to do the project, so it's pretty hard to think about what you can do in 18 months that is going to be achievable, that could go beyond being digital. So digital felt like, again, the right solution for that. And yeah, again, thinking about the capacity of those groups, what they are capable of doing and how much time they can dedicate to something like this. So that was really, really high in our mind. It's just a lovely photo, so I threw it in. This is from the Isle of Egg campaign before their buyout back in the day. And Kimmy here, who is on the left of the photo, is still an absolute mainstay of the island and on the board of the Heritage Trust that look after the island as well. Has anyone been over to Egg? No hands up. Well, some hands up. Oh, great. It's brilliant, isn't it? It's absolutely beautiful. What a place. So how to preserve it? Well, within our funding, we had a huge commitment to making sure that we were bringing training and offering opportunities to community members to upskill themselves really in terms of approaching oral histories or working with archived materials. The focus really from the funding point of view was through oral history training, but we were really conscious of the fact that it's a bigger understanding. You know, doing that in isolation was maybe a missed opportunity, because actually you'd get into a room and you'd be there with people who had far more knowledge and insight than you, people who had gone to the School of Scottish Studies and knew much more than you did. So then being responsive to that every time we went into different rooms and see what was the lay of the land in terms of people's knowledge and understanding, and then for us to be responsive to it. So often changed actually from being solely about oral history training to diving into other ideas, or even discussing what people can do with that material at the end of the process. It's not just about doing this for the sake of the archive. Like, that's a nice byproduct that we benefit from, but actually why undertake this work for your own community's sake, and what could your community do with it? That became a really really significant part of things as we traveled around. So yeah, it turned into discussions about digitization, about archives. There was, from some communities, a real desire to actually set up their own physical archive. So we're like, right, what do we do? I don't have the skills to be able to, bring that to people. So we've been working in conjunction with High Life Highland, so the Highland Council's archive service, and they've come and delivered sessions with us. We documented that and shared that kind of through our website, project website, to try and just bring those things within access to people. So if they've got those questions. And yeah, we wanted, like I've just said already, but we really wanted to highlight the opportunities that could be there for that material to be something else. I don't just do this as a burden when you're already stretched for the sake of this archive, but actually, what else could you do with the material for yourselves, whether it's, to do with tourism, whether it's to do with community well-being, whatever it might be. Another wee snap. So this is from one of the lecturers, Simon Fraser Memorial Lecturer in Edinburgh. Karyn Polwart, Maggie Fife, legend that she is, Anne Fraser, Simon's wife, and Agnes Rennie from Galson Estate. So they were the panel. You can actually see it online if you wanted to. I'm really pitching for, I'm like turning this into an advert, but all of the videos from each of the lectures are available on the Community Land Scotland website, or on their YouTube channel if you want to kind of tune in and see any of the discussions that were had. And there's more to come. There's one in Staffin. There will be one in London in February, if I manage to find a venue, and there will be another one in Egg as well. But all of those will be live streamed if anyone's interested. How we're storing it. So we, again, because of the limitations of time of the funding, which feels like so often the narrative around these things, but we wanted to find a partnership and an organisation to work with that would have that experience and insight already. So we approached Community Sites, who a number of different small organisations have used in terms of building their kind of digital archive. They've got lots of experience and enthusiasm around the subject, so they felt like a perfect fit. They were also really open to us kind of talking through what we're hopeful of and what we've, what things might come. And they were really hand-holding in that process, so that was really useful. And subsequently, actually, at the DPC event last week, heard somebody else talking about how they had used that model, the Community Sites kind of system, to their own ends. And actually that was really, really useful for us, and just in terms of thinking about cataloguing and how we actually subdivide information, how we can use that framework to the best of its ability. With, sometimes you need those case studies to really be able to understand what things are possible. So we wanted to ensure that, the website would be there. It would be extremely easy for people to submit to. So it is basically just a web form that people can go to. There's slight caveats and limitations to what they can upload at the first instance. So they, maximum of so many images. Images can only be 5 megabytes in size, and that sort of thing. Scanned documents. But there is the option for audio as well, but people need to register before they're able to do some of those components. So once they've uploaded their first one, we kind of go through a little approval. We'll kind of lay it out and put it onto the website, and they can return back having signed up, and they can continue to edit or add more content as they go. And we've seen quite a lot of that already, that people will do a first submission and then they'll return to it having signed up. So it's working quite well in terms of that. We're conscious of the fact that the project is funded for 18 months, but the website is funded for 5 years. So what on earth happens at that point in time? You don't want to have asked all these communities to make this effort and go on this journey, submit this material, and then lo and behold, in 5 years' time, it's just erased somewhere. Or I mean, it just makes me shudder to think about that. But it is possible with the community site model that we can basically download that content as an archived version, and then we would be able to see. Sorry, it's Community Sites was the name of the organisation. I'm sure I can put a link in the chat after as well. I'll look that out. It's actually on the bottom. There's a link for them on the bottom of the 100 Years website, which is on the last card, the address for this. And yeah, so we have a way of downloading the material. It's not just sort of trapped online. We'll be able to do that in a template that we could then upload again. We've been looking to make sure that as we go in terms of our cataloguing and our process with this, it's going to be as hopefully compliant with other people, so that we're not just building something that's unique to ourselves, but something that might find a connection in other places. And as this project has been going along, the number of overlaps in minor or major ways with other organizations, other research projects, other things going on, feels very validating, but also it's that realization that actually we're not alone in this, and actually there's a real opportunity to work together. So hopefully we'll find the funding in the long term to keep everything together and in a good place, but I'm sure it might come in conjunction with another organisation. And of course, we're backing everything up, and we're storing things in multiple places. Unfortunately for us, it's on Microsoft SharePoint, which I've got to say is not designed for anything other than Word documents. So if you can find a better option, I'd do that. Now I'm probably up 10 minutes already, aren't I?
I'm going to see you, I think, kind of wind it up now, maybe.
Yeah, no worries. This is always the gamble, isn't it? I didn't set a timer when I started. No. So it's a couple of pictures. But yeah, next steps, we're thinking about funding and continuing. What do we do with this archive? As those stories come in and as we build it up, what do we do with it, and how do we engage people with it? What materials can we create, and how do we get people to come in and hear these stories and make the most of that opportunity? And that's pretty much it. Yeah. Oh, there's lots of things I've learned, but I would say, yeah, never make assumptions about what people are capable of or have the time for. And yeah, partnerships, I think, it's hard to know where to start with that, but there are just so many things going on. So get yourself out there, and those partnerships will just continue to appear. And we've had so much support, I think, already in the project, and I'm sure that will continue to go on. I think, yeah, preparing for the unexpected. I mean, we got within about a week of us sort of launching the project, we had somebody contact and say they had written the business cases for almost every single community buyout in the formative years, and they had basically half of their attic and an entire garage full of paperwork, which was not digitized, and when were we going to come and collect it? So it's which is I'm quite excited about, but I don't have an answer to that. So if anyone's got any ideas, anyway, again, sorry for being late, Audrey. I'll wrap it up at that. There's a website addresses there as well if anyone wants to have a look.
Ian, are you happy to share your slides as well?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you.
No worries. Let's stop sharing now. Okay.
Please, if you can, that would be brilliant.
I know how to stop, but I didn't know how to start.
No. That's great, because we are going to share the slides, and you're going to have lots of links in there. I've put a couple of links in the chat, but also you can see the link to the community sites, which is a commercial operation, I have to say, but it is one that's used a lot. Now, I'm going to see a few hands are up, but I have to start at the beginning, and I'm going to ask Gil or Jill, I don't know, to unmute and ask, because you had a question just for Karyn.
I did. It's kind of linked to Ian's talk as well, because when people bring oral history or materials and they're trusting a site with it, I'm concerned about if there's things they don't want to share immediately, because there are certain groups who want to keep their stories, but they might not want to share with everybody. And when Karyn was talking about a definition about having from the National Archives about having material and making it accessible, I know there are members in our group that are happy to tell their stories, but will need the reassurance that it's not going to go public until they're ready for it. And how can you digitally preserve without sharing? And make it openable in 70 years' time or whatever, if that's possible. So just GDPR concerns, really.
Yeah, you definitely can. So that is covered in the plan to share section of the toolkit. So when you go onto the website for the Community Preservation Toolkit, if you go to the toolkit matrix and then scroll down to plan to share, so it's not level 1, it's, I believe, between levels 2 and 3. We would call that a closure period. So the main thing that we point out in the toolkit is to make sure that you have all that information before you take in the content. So you know exactly what that person wants to happen with their story, in essence. And if you don't have permission to share something, then just don't share it. That is level 1. If you do not have the permissions to do it, do not do it. It's not worth the headaches that will come from that. Aside from that, as long as you are legally compliant, you can decide what you do with the content. So if they want it closed for 70 years, if they want it closed for 100 years, as long as that's written in your documentation and the people that are coming after you know that that is the case, then you're absolutely fine. That's why your documentation is so important, because that is where you write down everything that you're going to be doing and how it's going to be done, especially for when you're no longer doing it, if that makes sense.
That's great. There is a question actually from Kevin, who I might ask if you'd like to unmute, Kevin, because it relates very much to that rather than going on to another subject. Kevin, would you like to just follow up on that?
Yes, certainly. Yes, there is a parallel, I think, with Gil's question. And mine is, first of all, Karyn and Ian, very interesting topics. Thank you, extremely useful. My question was this: when asking others to share documents or photos or cine film, etc., it might be useful to have some bona fides that we could declare, or some kind of evidence of competence. I've had situations where someone's had, say, a really good photograph, an old photograph, or perhaps an old piece of cine film or something. And whilst I've got an extremely honest face, at the same time, it's perhaps quite a lot to ask people to part with them. And is there any qualification that could be acquired that would help to reassure potential donors of our competence and preservation and not having any kind of destructive aspect to any items that they might loan us?
Okay, in terms of digital, they would only ever have to give you copies. You don't need to take anything from them. You could just take copies if that was a concern. Otherwise, what you're talking about there is becoming an archivist. So
Yes.
that would make it a lot. So there's a range of qualifications up and down the UK that you could take to do that. And if you want more information about that, you can certainly get in touch with me afterwards. I can give you
Oh,
some
that'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you.
information. But yeah, that's talking about professionalizing what you do, which I don't really think is required, but there is other way. I mean, if you've got your policies and your procedures written down, you've also got that written documentation that this is what you do and this is how you do it and this is why. And in most cases, that should be enough, particularly because in the digital sense, you will only be having copies of people's content.
That's great. Thank you very much for answering my question.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to read out a question by Joey Simons, and then I will come over to you, Rob. I can see that your hand is up. I sometimes think this is really a question for Ian, but also maybe for Karyn as well. He asks, what's the biggest, most common mistake that community archives tend to make in the area of digital preservation?
I don't know if I am qualified to answer that. I think I would say so far, I mean, we are being quite restrictive in one sense in terms of people can submit the materials that they're choosing, which are saved as imagery, links to video. They can't actually upload video, audio files, scanned documents, and an actual just written copy to the website, to the the actual introduction to the sort of listing. So we aren't seeing people be able to sort of inundate us with a huge amount of content, but what we do quite often see is really shambolic file names and confusing sort of naming of files, but equally, you know, that's for us to deal with in terms of those submissions coming in. That's the way we've set things up for ourselves. We have got, you know, a policy of what we're going to do with those in terms of renaming them and kind of trying to keep everything in a nice, neat fashion. But I would say, yeah, and it's interesting actually just jump back in terms of that question of digitization. We are seeing a lot of people kind of saying, you know, we've got tons and tons of stuff. So we've taken to going and doing active sessions where we'll bring ourselves and we'll bring scanning equipment and become things to help in that process, so that we can actually be a bit hands-on. So we are blurring lines. We're sort of stumbling our way through and being a bit responsive in terms of what communities are coming to us with. So that's not really an answer to Rob's question at all, is it? But yeah, it's a murky one, because you just don't really know where people are at. Some are institutions that are really on a journey in terms of like building their own actual archive, and they're really on it. Others are keeping everything in a moldy shed, and it's all decaying really quickly. Other people have digitized everything already, so it's a real spread for us, and we're sort of learning as we go, to be honest.
Yeah, I would add to that, I suppose, in what Ian said, because the most common mistake that I see probably isn't covered in the toolkit, which is interesting. But I think that the most common mistake is people confusing digitization with digital preservation, and thinking that because they've scanned something, it is now safe and they don't have to do anything else with it. Or if it's uploaded to a website, you don't have to do anything with it because it's being preserved for you. It is not, and I can't stress that highly enough. They are two different processes. That's why I mentioned that earlier on in my talk, is that digitization is so important to protect these records, but digital records are actually more fragile than physical records, because with paper, we know it lasts hundreds of years. We've got it in our stores and repositories, and in some cases cupboards, that it's been there for hundreds of years, and we know that it's going to be fine, unless we get a really bad case of mold or a flood or a fire. But with digital preservation, we're not sure how long these records are going to last, because we are constantly evolving technologies. We're constantly changing how we store things, how we do things, and we're having to, in a sense, try and keep ahead of a curve that is just running in a circle. So I think if that's the one thing I would hope to get across, it would be that, is that digital preservation is the second half of that digitization story, and one needs the other. I think that's what I would say.
Yes, can I just add, with because my background's in conservation, because you digitize something and you make a digital file, you don't get rid of the original record. So please do keep all your photographs and papers, and don't think you can throw them away. There are lots of horror stories that we can't go into right now, but that has happened in the past. I'm going to let Rob, if you're very happy, Rob, to unmute, ask your question, and then I will go back to the chat and ask a question from Morag. So Rob, over to you first.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can.
There's a couple of things really. Ian was talking about long-term backup, and what we've been recommended to do, we had a consultant in to help us with our scanning. He's got us to open an account with Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services. It's worth looking it up, Ian. They do a thing called Glacier Deep Archive is the system, and we're paying something like £2 a month for absolutely tons of archiving. And the reason it's so cheap is because you only pay for it when you want to get it back again. Right, so this is just totally an emergency thing. We hope we will never have to get it back again, but you know, it's there in case we ever do. So just to say that. I had a question for Karyn though, which was about metadata. This is a word that's terrifying me at the moment. We're storing our born digital archive to the best of our ability. We're backing it up. We've got this archiving going on. But people keep telling me, oh yes, but what about the metadata? What are you doing with your metadata? And I don't really understand what it is. And I'm worried that we're bringing all of this stuff in and we're not capturing the stuff that later they're going to say, no, you should have captured that. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. It's a very scary word that doesn't necessarily need to be scary or used as often as it is. So metadata is essentially data about data. So the information that you collect about the content in your care. I believe topic 4, understand your content, covers this within the toolkit. So you can start at the very beginning from level 1 and work your way through. The way I would suggest thinking about it is if you were to produce a catalogue of your Born Digital collections, what information would you have to have in that catalogue for a user to make sense of it? So that would be a title, a description, a date, a format. And from there, you can build up as you get more adept at filling things in and deciding what information is important to your group. So you might be a group that has oral histories that's going to have access restrictions on them. So you would want to be logging that information as well. A spreadsheet is your best friend for that. Spreadsheets make it easy to see. It's clear to read back from. It's easy to get the information in and out of an Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheets or something like that. So I would start with the understand your content topic of the toolkit and build up from there.
Okay, I will check that out. The paper archives that we hold, I'm at Whitby Museum and we're a charitable community archive. We're cataloguing to ISAD-G standards using axial collections, and I've attempted to put our digital archive in there, and it's not a particularly good fit. You know, the fields don't sort of equate, but I think we're kind of getting there. But that's really reassuring. Thank you. Don't be frightened of the word, just crack on.
It sounds to me like you're doing a lot more than you think you're doing, so I wouldn't be worried. It sounds like you're doing well.
Well, we're capturing as much as we can. I mean, as Ian said, if you don't capture it, you know, it could be gone. You don't know. So I don't want to be the person who did it wrong, and you know, it's all lost. But yeah, that's very reassuring. So thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you, Rob, for that. I'm just going to head back to the chat because I'm going to ask this question on behalf of Maura Cross. And it is getting back to this whole thing about who owns the information. So if material is donated and it is freely given by local people, is it ever monetized by private entrepreneurs? And can you think of I can think of one example. She says in Harris where that may have happened and you have to pay to get your own information back. So it's really about ownership. And this is something I think you do actually talk about, Karyn, in the toolkit, and it's something probably Ian has come across. So if people donate an image and then they take their photograph back, but you've got a digital copy of it, who actually owns it? Who's got the copyright on that?
Yeah. So level 2 of the plan to share topic covers this. Even if you are donated content free of charge, you should always have someone fill in a donor form because that is where they will tell you what they want to happen with their content. You should be honest on that form about the uses that you're going to use that content for. So if you're planning on monetizing that should be in the form and they should be able to opt out of that. Anybody who charges somebody to get their own content back is disgusting, and I'd be looking at a lawyer if I'm being honest. I don't know how anybody could live with themselves doing that. If it's your content, we would at a professional level, we would give it back. You don't get to keep it just because you want to make some money off it. That's not okay. But yeah, on that form, they can also relinquish copyright. So they could hand you over the copyright, but they should be doing that with the knowledge beforehand about what you're planning on doing with that content.
Ian, have you ever come across this? I mean, recently, this is something you might have come across.
In terms of the 100 Years archive, it's not something that, you know, it like Karyn has said, in terms of people submitting materials to us, we're mindful of the fact that quite often folk will have, you know, laid their hands on something which the journey to them has been a bit questionable, and actually, you know, there's lots of question marks about that. We're having to sort of be fairly clear about, you know, what is our responsibility, what is people's responsibilities in terms of submitting. I mean, I have encountered, yeah, that reality of somebody's image being in an archive and it being monetized, and that's not connected to this current, well, it is connected to this current role. As part of the exhibition, I was very keen to find an image that I knew was out there in terms of Neudart and the Seven Men in Neudart and that kind of piece of history. And actually on locating a connection to the family whose image it was, they didn't have it, but they said that it was kind of now stored at an archive, which was like a large archive anyway. So I contacted them to ask about use of it, and obviously we had to pay a substantial amount of money, which was an interesting sort of insight into that. Yeah, that releasing of, I don't know, well, yeah, what was in that paperwork when it gets handed over, I suppose. And it feels like an important thing to be mindful of, that actually it feels quite odd if the family wanted to have the use of that image and would have given it to us for this project, to then be going and spending 60 odd quid getting a license to use it for a limited period of time from a national body. But I've evaded seeing any names in that, so that's good.
Now I'm going to say thank you for that. And what the other thing is, of course, we really are going to be talking a lot more about that in the next webinar, Tuesday lunchtime next week, when we really will be looking at GDPR. And we will have a case study as well from quite an established community archive in Cramond, who will be working through this and will be able to answer any questions as well from the point of view of being a community archive. I just would say, Rob, if you want to make a comment, please just unmute.
Yeah, it's just a quick one. That we raised this question actually with some people that I know at the University of Dundee. They put me in touch with Tim Padfield, who is kind of the authority on copyright. And it's a tricky one. With paper images, you know, photographs, people could give you the photographs and give you ownership of the paper. So they are now your photos, but without giving you ownership of the copyright. And the copyright lasts for 70 years after the death of the photographer. So the problem could be a family will quite happily donate digital images to you, but don't actually own the copyright. And you may never get to find out who actually does. So we're really, really careful about that now. You know, we assume that, you know, people didn't start taking photos until they were 20 years old. They could have lived to 100. Copyright 70 years after they died. That's 150 years. So if we look at a photo and think, right, that was taken in 1936, it's still in copyright. So you've got to be really careful. I don't have an answer. Sadly, I didn't get an answer other than no, assume it's in copyright until you know that it isn't. The other thing is that a photographer can pass the copyright on to his or her children, but it still only lasts for 70 years after their death. You know, it doesn't get extended because they've passed it on. But it is an absolute minefield. So we're being very wary about what we put online, let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Well, I hope to see many of you next Tuesday. We can continue this conversation, but I would also like to take the opportunity of thanking our speakers, Karyn Williamson from the Digital Preservation Coalition and Ian Craig from Community Land Scotland. We will be sharing the slides, and as I say, this is being recorded, so you can listen to it many times over. Okay, bye for now. Bye.